It's good to finally be here and to meet everyone. And I know some of you from other places and other connections. I work with Brother Jeremy, and I've worked with Scott now this past year. And I've known John and Bethany and their family for quite some time. But this is the first time I've gotten to meet the congregation that has accepted Paige and is helping her. So I appreciate so much the chance to be here with you. Just a little bit about my background. I'm in rural West Tennessee. I've always preached in places where there are few churches. That's been part of my upbringing, part of my raising. My grandfather helped start one church in Northern California. My father helped start 3 churches in Nevada, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. And so I have always endeavored to go to those places where few people are willing to go. And so I appreciate so much those that support me in that effort. I also get involved with camps with young people, and so my wife and I have been able to be involved in many of these camps that I think are helpful for the next generation, and I hope that if you're raising children or grandchildren, you'll consider what opportunities there are for them to be able to grow further in their walk with God. My father used to get on the ham radio every other Thursday night and talk to missionaries in Ghana. And I would sit there sometimes and listen to the stories that the missionaries would tell. And from time to time, they would come to my home congregation like I am here with you, and they would share their stories. I thought, boy, what an exciting life that would be. And then my dad gave me some advice. He's fluent in 8 or 9 languages, and at one point he told me, don't go anywhere unless you can speak the language. Well, I traveled abroad a little bit when I was younger, and I always went to the places that spoke English. That was easy. But I never thought about learning another language. I studied French for about 10 years. I took French in junior high school, French in high school, French in college. I got enough to pass through college, and that was it. I got to France, I couldn't speak a word or understand anything anybody was saying. But it opened my eyes. My father worked for the Peace Corps. We would have people from Africa come and work with him, or from Brazil come and work with him. And I appreciated the differences in cultures and the blessings that would be to me as I would grow up. So in many ways, I think God was preparing me before I ever knew what the plan was. And so 2004, my family had the opportunity to go to Africa. All kinds of doors and opportunities opened that I could have never predicted. But we're able to take everyone there. If you see the little girl in the blonde standing next to Sarah, that's Paige, back when she was on this trip with us. And I promised her I'll take her back, and I still have to keep that promise for her. But I've been able to return many times. The congregation in Paris, Tennessee, has the understanding that I do these works. I spend time doing the camps and time doing the overseas work. And they're very gracious to me and help me and assist me in that, and are very capable at carrying on while I'm gone. So this last trip, I was able to go to both Ethiopia and Tanzania. And if you'll notice, some of those countries change from time to time, and I'll talk about a little bit of the work in each place. But my focus has really been in South Africa and more recently East Africa. And so these are the countries that I've been able to preach the gospel in, starting in South Africa and Zimbabwe, going over to Cameroon and preaching there, and then back to Tanzania and Zambia, and then this year I finally got to Ethiopia in spite of some other obstacles that I've had in the past. When we talk about preaching the gospel, we have to understand who the people are and how we're going to reach them with the gospel. And so the lifestyles of things, there are certain things that are common in every African country, and as they're quick to point out, there are very stark differences in every country. And when you preach the gospel, you have to be attuned to those differences and those similarities. And so there are similarities in many places, whether you're in the city or in the country. The women will get the water at the well. Now, there are big cities that have indoor plumbing. I'm not trying to give the impression that you never have some conveniences, but you're never able to rely on them. They have electricity in many cities, but it may not be on for 4 or 5 hours a day, and you don't know which 4 or 5 hours that might be. They have water in many countries, but don't drink it out of the tap or you'll regret that. There are all kinds of things that when you look at how people live, you understand the environment of the gospel. And so when Jesus meets a woman at the well in John chapter 4, I understand that picture. I understand that's how those people live and how the message can be spread through those women. Sometimes it gets a little rustic, and you have to be prepared for that. And I warn people that talk about going, it's not all about fun and games and travel. You have to live, in many cases, like they live and put up with the inconveniences that they have to put up with. But it's worth it when you get there and you begin to teach people. You see this dichotomy of old houses and shacks that are put together with satellite dishes on top. You know, they can communicate with the world. And so we have a huge opportunity now to go to these places that used to take a lifetime commitment to get in there and learn the language and preach the gospel. But now we can do it with technology. I've been focused most recently in Tanzania, the city of Dar es Salaam. And this is the fastest growing city in Africa, some people say in the world, and the population is just going off the charts. This is what they predicted it would be back in about 2000. This is actually where it's heading right now. And by the end of the century, they predicted it will be home to over 76 million people. That puts it right now at more than twice the size of Tokyo, 3 times the size of Dubai. of Mumbai. So all these opportunities, there are people that need to hear the gospel in all kinds of places in Africa. Of course, you have to put up with all kinds of things like traffic and understanding the growth pains that come along with progress. Sometimes you understand the life of the people and how they have to live. This motorcycle is trying to get through with his load, and he took a wrong turn. And the guy in the car in front of us got out and helped him put his bike back up, and he went on his way. You see rural scenes in the villages. People still raising cattle and sheep and goats. Roads that you're not quite sure you can pass over. And people selling everything imaginable on the side of the road. But how do you deal with a country like this? You have rain seasons twice a year. And each rain season is capable of washing out the roads. And so we need to understand and have some sympathy with these brothers and sisters in Christ and their struggles. They just have to get together to survive. I was working with a preacher who is a very punctual man. And I thought, it's sort of ironic that God's put him in Africa. Because he would always be upset that people were late. But when you have to go to the well to get your water that morning, you don't know how many people are in front of you or how much water they're going to get. And when you have to go out and find your firewood, you don't know if it's going to be close by or if you're going to have to walk a ways to get it. And all those things can add up, and so that 9 o'clock start time may easily be pushed back to 9:30 or 10 o'clock or even later. And sometimes they take advantage of that. But I think sometimes that's just part of how life is for them. And so as we talk about lifestyles, we need to understand how things work in Africa and how they don't work. Talked about language a little while ago. I'm blessed that so many people speak English in so many parts of the world now. I've tried to go to Cameroon and use my French, and they're a little more patient in Africa with my French than the French are. But they also speak English in Cameroon. And so I usually work with translators because we often have a second or a third native language that we have to work through as well. You have to be willing to eat and live the way the people live and eat, whether it's mupani worms or chicken's feet or kitfo. Anybody knows what that is in Ethiopia? Dogs is one of the things in Iringa. We went to Iringa this year, and they have dogs that they cook. And, I've got 2 pet dogs. I love my dogs. I can't imagine eating my dogs or anybody else eating my dogs. But you know what? When God told Peter, rise, kill, and eat, I can understand that a little bit better now when people talk about eating dog. You have to understand how the politics work. Who do you have to get to know so you have the opportunity to go in these villages? This is a chief down in the southern area of Tanzania. My friend Zuberi, I'll show a picture of him shortly, but Zuberi is related to the chief's family down there through marriage. And so he was my invitation into the village, a Muslim village. There are 2 cars. The chief has 1 car, and the Muslims share the other one. And so I go down to this place, and he says, you are welcome to come to my village to preach. I understand you've been doing this, and there's no problem. And so we go down, and he gives us protection. His word is that you will be safe in my town. And you put up with things like the drive-through. You don't have a window you drive through. They just come up to your window, and they sell you whatever you need. And you have to be careful. I bought some locusts one time. I never had wild locusts. And I regretted it about 4 days. You don't buy food off the street. And that's one of the reasons why. Sanitation. This is landfill. It's hard to see. I think there's a laser pointer on here somewhere. But right up here, we've got a man dumping his garbage. And down here, we actually have people picking through the garbage to see what they can take home. Kids playing the garbage dump in bare feet, because that's what they have. This is my friend Zubairi. Brother Zubairi has been preaching the gospel for several years now. Before that, he was a professional soccer player, football goalie. If you want to have an open door in Africa, just tell somebody, hey, this guy used to play goalie for the Young Lions. That opens the door, and they all know him from his time in soccer. But he literally lived on a landfill. His house was built. This is the front porch of his neighbor's house. We finally got him moved off that place into another place last year. He started a church just out in the suburbs. And when you think suburbs, don't think about traffic and driving. Think about carts and bikes and motorcycles and walking. But he has gone from his own family, which is fairly large, to a congregation that now has 21 souls in less than a year. The Sunday I was there were 41 of us. Several of us were visitors, but he also had 3 Muslims visiting from the community because they heard there was something interesting going on. I preach in rural Tennessee. There are a lot of small country churches. And sometimes we focus on how small we are. And what I want you to understand today is the opportunity of the kingdom of Jesus Christ in these other places, where it will continue to grow from one generation to the next as we do this work. There are so many young people. When I look at my congregation at home, I'm the young guy with the gray hair. There are a couple that are a little bit younger than I am. But when I go to Africa, I'm the old man. It's filled with children and families. And teenagers do what teenagers do in every part of the world. You hang out in the pool hall on a Friday night. And there's not much else to do. Gracious people. A woman who comes and kneels and gives you a sugar stock because she wants to give you a gift. A woman who brings 4 eggs as a gift. She'd actually asked us while we were there doing a meeting why we didn't take a collection like all the other churches did. And we explained that to her, and we said that they will be taking an offering on the first day of the week. And so she skipped her home church and came so that she could bring an offering on the first day of the week. I could fill up the slides and all of our time with churches. There are so many wonderful places and so many wonderful people. This is a church in Zimbabwe, a church that Willie Raphael has worked with. And I got a note one day that some rival church had come along and stolen the roof off their building. And they were worried about how they were going to pay for a new roof. And I got there, and I looked at this group. I said, you can't fit in this building. Don't worry about a new roof. You need a new building. And so they're working towards that. Sometimes you meet under a tree. A fellow by the name of Steve Rudd preaches up in Hamilton, Ontario. And Steve was talking to me about the work in Zimbabwe. And he said, I keep a listing of all the churches of Christ that I know of on my webpage, Bible.ca, if you ever need to look for a congregation. And he said, but I only have one listed in Zimbabwe, and they don't have any contact information. I said, well, there are plenty of churches in Zimbabwe. He said, really? What do these people do, meet under a tree? And I said, yes, if they can find a tree. And so Steve, to his credit, bought a ticket and went to Zimbabwe with me. And he did a great work there. We worked together in some areas. He worked by himself and with Willie in other areas. got home and he decided, we need women to get Bibles in Zimbabwe. And he started a campaign. We raised several tens of thousands of dollars. And the preachers in Zimbabwe have been working to give these Bibles out to women that want to have a Bible study. And these women have a condition. They can keep the Bible if they follow through and make the Bible study every week. Bible's theirs. And so great work is done just spreading the Word of God through all these opportunities. So Steve got back. I think he entered 60 churches in Zimbabwe when he got back. And has the GPS coordinates, so if you're looking for the tree, you might find a number or somebody that you can call and make sure that they're meeting under the tree that day. The church building. I was talking to John a little while ago, and then, there are problems when you get to a certain size. And psychologically, they tell us that you will not grow once you reach a certain limit within your capacity. Pews in the front, they're there, but they're still empty because people just don't feel comfortable sitting that close to everything. They do what they can. But the church is not a building. And when you see all the people that have been in there to come and hear the Word of God, that's what they're there for. We want to help these people. And so my job is not to give travel logs. My job is to go over and help uphold the hands of the men that are there every week teaching the gospel to all these people. And I get the chance to work with preachers. Again, I could fill up all of our time with lots and lots of pictures and slides of preachers and tell stories about a lot. I'm going to focus on a couple of them. But my time seems to be best spent working with the preachers so that they can be encouraged to do their work week to week. This year I had the opportunity to go to Ethiopia. Went there with Brother Scott Owen. Brother Scott Owen preaches in West Tennessee, not too far away from where I'm at. And his father and some other men went back to Ethiopia back in the 1980s. There was a huge famine in Ethiopia, and they had a contact there that said, you need to come over here and preach. And so about 40 years now, they have been preaching. Some men go over every other month. Some men go over a couple times a year. Some men go over once in a while. I got the chance to go with Brother Scott. We did several lessons for preachers. This is the first group of preachers that we worked with on this trip. Scott worked with 3 groups on this trip. 220 men. Some of these men preach for congregations that are only 40 or 50 people. That's twice the size of what we have in Paris. One of these guys preaches for a congregation that has 900 people. He explained that it's a nomadic area. And so a lot of the people are gone. They're with the herds. So they only have about 300 every week. But a couple of times a year, everybody comes home, and they have to have 3 services for the 900 people. And so I thought, this group of preachers probably represents between 10 and 60,000 Christians based on the numbers in their congregations. I can't reach that many. I can help these guys. And when you help me or you help someone else in that country, you're helping many other people. And so this is where the work has been focused in Ethiopia, and it's doing very well in some of those areas. Women in this culture are very much second-class citizens. I don't say I laugh at it, but really when you hear people talking about patriarchy and how women are oppressed in this country, you have no concept of what it's really like in these other countries. Most of these countries I've been working with, in Tanzania in particular, the Muslim population in some areas is about 70%. Some areas it's much lower than that. You have no rights. You have a husband, and he may have 2 or 3 wives, depending on how many he wants to afford. One of the ladies that I was teaching in Cameroon could not reach her with the gospel. She was 26 years old when I met her. She's now pushing 30, has a little girl 7 or 8 years old, and she cannot support herself. So she's getting married. That's her option. And she's marrying a Muslim man because that's her village and that's her background. I don't really think it has much to do with her faith. She believes in God, but she doesn't particularly follow the Quran. I asked her, Are you the only wife? And her answer was, for the time being. Imagine going into a marriage where you don't know from one week to the next if your husband is going to pick somebody else. And so these women, in many cases, are treated almost worse than animals. That's not true in every case, every situation, every family. But it is a general stereotype. And to the credit, the Christians are breaking down those barriers, offering classes, Bible classes for women, buying Bibles specifically for women, because we know the heart of women wants to serve God, and that heart will often influence the children and the husband. Last year I went to the Mtwara region of Tanzania. This is down in the southern area, about an 8.5-hour bus trip. We made one stop, by the way. Stop was 12 minutes long, and if you didn't get back on the bus at the end of 12 minutes, you're on your own. I can't do that anymore. But when we got down there, we're working in an area. There are 2 churches in the Mtwara region, and it is just within 100 miles of the Mozambique border. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more. But even in some of these rural areas, you still have congregations of 30, 40 people. Ringa. We had to get on the puddle jumper for Ringa. So we got up early in the morning. We took what I call a safari plane. This is Zubaire's first time on a plane. Zubair is a big man. He could not get in the back door to get to his seat. They had to let him in the co-pilot's door so he could sit in the front. And so we flew out there. We were able to land and preach classes later that afternoon. That was the advantage. We didn't have to spend 8 hours on a bus and then spend the night and then start the next day. So we made that choice. It was Zubaire's first plane trip. He spent half of it praying. The other half, he was asking me what's going on because he had never been on a plane before. We got there. I worked this time with Brother Andrew Roberts from Florida, preaches in the Livingston congregation down there. And Brother Nate Morrison used to preach up in Alaska. Now he's down in Richmond, Virginia. Both of them I consider young men. They're younger than I am, but they're the same age that I was when I started this work. And so I invited them to go with me. Last year I took Brother Chad Brewer with me. Brother Chad preaches in the Richmond, Virginia area, and he texted me last week, said, I'm ready to go back. When are we going to go? And so we'll be getting together and making our plans, probably beginning of the year, as to what we can do and when we can go and how we can go. I've seen the model in Ethiopia, which is 40 years old. I've worked in Zimbabwe, and that model now is 20 years old. Now I've been in Tanzania, I think 6 times in the last 4 years. And so we have a pattern. It's not our pattern, it's God's pattern. And so as we teach first principles and foundations and what Christianity is all about and how we each become gospel spreaders, the work will continue to grow. But I want to focus just a couple minutes on Zimbabwe. I had the opportunity to go to Zimbabwe many years ago. Again, another bunch of doors that opened so that my family could go to South Africa. It was not recommended that we take them into Zimbabwe, so I went with Brother David Beckley. And we had a preacher training class. We had about 25 preachers total that year, 2004. Following year, we more than doubled that number of preachers. We were going to come back and do that again, except they had a civil war in 2008. And then other things happened, and so it took a while before I got back there again. But on this trip, I met a fellow by the name of Wilesi Raphael. And Brother Willie and I our personalities clicked, our interests clicked. I have this thing that I do. I've done it in several languages about the 17 categories of the Bible. Bob Waldron has developed this material. And I put hand motions together with Paige, and we were around and we teach it. I've translated it into Venda and into Shona and into French and Swahili and English, and I always get them mixed up, and it makes for a good laugh. But Willie took this tool home with him in 2004, came back in 2005, and told me how he had been using it. And he was working with 3 congregations at the time. And those people have a good Bible knowledge because they can see how it goes together. You know, you talk about a new convert, and they've got enthusiasm. They start in Genesis, and that goes pretty well. And they get to Exodus, that's got some good storylines. Numbers, a little dicey. You got a lot of names and a lot of numbers. I get to Deuteronomy, you're reading the same thing over and over again. It sounds like a legal transition. And people give up. So you give the Bible story, you help them understand what it's all about, how the promises in Genesis are going to come true in the New Testament. And you tie it together, and Willie did that with his congregations. Willie is one of the few men that I have absolute trust in. He has never failed me or others that have trusted him. He has been given large sums of money. Willie and I have been blacklisted off of Western Union because we send so much money back and forth, and Western Union says you're reaching your limits. I got chastised and blacklisted shortly for MoneyGram. World Remit hasn't come after me yet, but as you try and help these people, you've got to find ways that you can do that. They've got to worry about it from their end. They start getting large sums of money, and all of a sudden the terrorist watch list starts flagging their accounts, and they come under scrutiny. But trustworthiness is very difficult to judge and gauge in people. And so Willie has proven himself very trustworthy. I rely on him when he recommends people, and there are times when he doesn't recommend people. Now, Willie will not badmouth a person, but he will say, you might want to look somewhere else. And that gives me all the information I need to know to look somewhere else. He is a hard worker. I think it's within the last 2 weeks, his 2 youngest sons have obeyed the gospel. His 2 older sons, the oldest one in particular, is now preaching on a regular basis, and Tino is probably going to go down that road as he gets a little bit older as well. And so I've been out to Willie's village. He has protected me from any kind of scrutiny, intrusion, hassle, whatever. And so I appreciate Willie so much. And he works with younger people. He works with young men. And the young men he has worked with, to my knowledge, all of them are doing a great work themselves. These are 2 other men that I met that first year in Zimbabwe. Kari Chingandi and Julius Tiani. And some people you just click with. And that was true of these 2 people. And when I went back, I worked with them several times. I did more preacher training sessions. And finally, I ended up doing a preacher training session at Julius's house and got to stay with him a couple of nights and work with him. There's a young man there that was a very bright college student. And I could tell as soon as he began asking questions that he was testing me. You know, he was asking these outrageous kinds of questions, trying to see how I would handle the pressure. What kind of answer am I going to give to him? His name was Admire. He's there in the front with the white shirts and the pink striped tie. Julius is in the back row on this one. Willie's also in the back. But Admire had their confidence. And so Julius took this young man and he began to work with him. Admire had lost his father at a young age. His mother had also passed away. This is his wife on the far side in the blue, and his 2 twin sisters that he had to provide for as they came of age. And so he stepped up, and Julius became his father, a spiritual father, the father he never had. And he encouraged this young man to preach the gospel. And Julius would take him when he went out, and then he would send Admire out to other places. The congregation in Zengeza continued to grow with their work and their teamwork. And then COVID hit. I happened to be in Zimbabwe when COVID hit. I'd planned to go to Ethiopia, and I'll talk about that in a little while. But initially, COVID was not much of an issue in Zimbabwe, but then it found a couple of victims. All right, Chingandi was taken to the hospital. His condition was so bad that they took him outside to give his bed to somebody else. After 2 days outside, somebody noticed he hadn't passed away. They brought him some water. He revived. He's got some lingering health issues. He's still preaching the gospel. He's still doing the work. And he's a success story. Julius is also a success story, but it was a different story. The last time I went to Zimbabwe, Willie had asked me if I would go back to Musapi and Mutare, and I said, no, I'll be coming in that day. I'll be tired, but I'd really like to go to Zingiza and see Julius. And so I got the chance to spend another half a day with Julius and his wife, Gwyneth. And that was the last time I got to see him. COVID took him away. 4 children. The oldest at the time was 22. She just graduated college. He was very proud of her. The other 3 were still in grade school, grammar school. One of them has graduated now, and he is helping his brother pass his A-level exams this year. And he and his big sister are helping their mother as they try to run a cafe to support their family. There's no social security, so to speak, in these countries. You depend on family. And in their case, because of Julius's work in the gospel, their family is the church, and the church cannot support them. And so they do what they can. And Admar has taken on the responsibilities that Julius had left behind. I appreciate the commitment to those people. How do you do this kind of work? I could probably tell a lot of stories. I can tell a lot of stories. And I have people say, I don't know how you do that. I've got people in my home congregation, and they get nervous when they set foot out of Henry County. They were born on the farm, they'll die on the farm. They have everything they need right in Henry County. They don't understand how you can go to places like this. And there are some things that you learn about later. You usually aren't aware of them at the time, but you learn about them later and you think, but for the grace of God, I wouldn't come through that. Cameroon in 2018, civil war has broken out between the English-speaking sections and the French-speaking sections. Our translator is from the English-speaking section. He invites us to go to his home village and preach the gospel there. We have a border crossing getting in. That's not too much of an issue at 5 in the morning, but there's a curfew. We have to get back at a certain time. And on our way back, there's a certain policeman that decides that he wants to check our paperwork. And my visa had expired 2 days before. And so we're detained by the side of the road for over an hour while they try to decide, are we going to arrest them or are we going to send them to some government agency and have them fix this visa thing? And finally they said, well, if you just give us $20, we'll let you go, and you promise to take care of it tomorrow. What we didn't know is that morning, one of his companions had been shot to death by the rebels. They were taking this very seriously. So he put out a statement, don't go into the Northwest Province. Watch out for some of the things that are happening. And Paul keeps asking me, when are you coming back? We can stay in the French area. The Civil War hasn't finished yet. His wife is having a difficult pregnancy, and she's due, I think it's another 3 weeks, but we've tried to help him as much as we can with that pregnancy. He has taken in many of the refugees. His brothers from the English-speaking area have come down in the French area and are living with him. Sometimes you change your plans. You don't know why, but it just doesn't seem like a good idea to go that route, that time, that day. Brother Ed and Brandon and I were traveling together, and we decided that we were going to change our route a little bit. We'd put Kenya off for another trip. We're flying out of Addis Ababa on Ethiopian Airlines. And as we're getting ready to fly out of Addis Ababa, we decide we're going to Dar es Salaam this trip. Next time we'll go to Nairobi. Flight 302 crashed 2 days later, going to Nairobi. When I came back through Dar es Salaam, I got the replacement plane, the unmarked plane. And the people on my flight crew had lost friends on that flight. Zambia, same year, chance of rain. One of the most powerful cyclones in history hits. It hits Malawi first, changes our plans and our flights, goes back out to sea, gathers more force, and comes in and devastates Mozambique and part of Zimbabwe. People want to know, what can I do? 1,300 people dead. More than 2,000 are still missing, presumed dead. 2.2 billion US dollars in damages. And people here wanted to get money there. I sent over $17,000. Most of it was through men that Willie recommended, because Willie had other sources that sent twice that amount to him to help these people rebuild their lives. These are our brothers and sisters in Christ. This is the kind of life that they have to put up with. I got a few drops of rain and got on the plane ahead of the storm. That's the rubble left over from the storm. I'm not going to take the time to read, but he talks about one of the Christian families said the wife was missing. They never found her. COVID-19. February and March of 2020, I'm scrambling around because I've heard about this thing. There's talk about travel shutting down, and I need an N95 mask. And there's not an N95 mask to be found anywhere. Finally, some people that were visiting with us have an industrial supply. They said, oh, we use N95 masks in our shop. And so they gave me a box of N95 masks. I realize now it probably wouldn't have done much good. But Steve Rudd and I got there. I went to Tanzania. He went to Zimbabwe. We met up together, and then my plans changed. I ended up coming home on an empty plane to an empty airport because everything had been shut down. I had to change my flight plans 4 times to get home through Houston. And then you find out your travel company's not going to be able to help you out of this one. And the U.S. Embassy is recommending that you don't stay in Ethiopia after you've already booked a hotel there, and so you come home. But, there are other things to worry about, like typhoid, malaria, dengue fever. I've got some friends over in Sierra Leone, and some of those young men have now had some of these diseases multiple times, and you probably have met some of them. This girl in the red, she's now an orphan. Her mother passed away about a month ago. She's now 18 years old. There's no Social Security for her. She's 18. Her options basically are to get married or find somebody that will take care of her. And so the Christians are helping her. But the day that we took this picture, she sat in the front seat, I sat in the back, and she got sick to her stomach. We dropped her off at the hospital, and she had typhoid. Al-Shabaab, ISIS, northern Mozambique. They live on the islands off the coast, and they come in and they raid. And in this particular news clipping, they'd come in and they'd taken the men of a village and executed them all by beheading them on a soccer field. Over 50 men lost their lives that way. Just a picture, there's the border of Mozambique. This is the place, the congregation I was working with about 100 miles away. They began to have troops pushing them up to the border. So they're coming into Tanzania while I'm down in that area. I'd asked Barry, is this a good idea? Should we really be here? He said, it's fine. No problem. There are preachers in that area. He said, they need us. He wants me to go back. So we went back. We passed convoys on the way down, not big convoys, but they were trying to do what they could to secure their border. We got home to Dar es Salaam, back to the city, and found out that while we were down in the terrorist Muslim area, a terrorist had killed 4 people in front of the French and American embassies in Dar es Salaam. You don't know what's going on. Your trust is in God and His grace. That chief that told me it was safe to work in his village, About 3 months after I got home, found out that our driver and the chief's car had been confiscated. Driver arrested for carrying guns to ISIS. He didn't have any guns while I was in the car because we had our stuff in the back, Bibles. Zubairi went down, spoke to the magistrate, spoke to the chief. The young man is out on Zubairi's recommendation. I hope he turns his life around. Traveling through Ethiopia on the way home, Addis Ababa, I had a really long layover. It was about 14 hours. And the reason I chose that was because the alternative was to try and get off and have a COVID test within a certain time frame that I could take back and get back into the airport. And I thought, I'm just going to stay at the airport. And the security guard noticed that I was just hanging out at the airport. Sat down next to me, said, "Can I ask you a question?" I said, "Sure." He says, "I only make $60 a month. Can you give me a donation?" And we talked about that for a couple minutes, and so I finally said, "A donation, is it for the airport? Can I get a receipt?" That usually shuts them down. He said, no receipt, for myself. Now, this guy was a security risk, and so I waited till he was off duty. My 14-hour layover is longer than his 8-hour shift. And so I went and told the supervisor, I said, "You've got cameras in the airport, you can check this out." But this is what he was saying to me while he was sitting next to me. You never know what's going to happen. But your trust is in God, because work needs to be done. I was up in the mountains, Zimbabwe, not too far away from Mozambique. We had a great work there. The 2 congregations came. It was not politically safe for me to go to one congregation, so they walked over the mountain to come to our workshop. And this little boy comes up to me. He speaks to me in Shona very insistently, and I have no idea what he's saying. So I asked Willie, I said, "What's he saying?" He said, "Oh, he's asking, 'Are you my father's friend?'" I thought, what a great lesson. And I said, "Yes." And he took my hand, and he would not let go. I was his father's friend. Went to the car. He rode with us to his father's house, perfectly happy being with his father's friend. And so my question for us this morning is, are you my father's friend? I get to meet these people. That's such a privilege. But the question is the same question for everybody. Do you know God? Do you have a relationship with Him? Are you, as James tells us, the friend of God, as he describes Abraham's faith in James chapter 2? Have you come to Him in faith? A living, trusting, obedient faith, taking His hand? We come to that faith through Jesus Christ, acknowledging that He is the Son of God, that He came and lived among us, with us, tempted in every way that we are, and yet without sin, that He might give Himself in our place. We'll talk about that more later on when we talk about the Lord's Supper. But are you my Father's friend? Not everybody can travel. I didn't travel for many years. I never anticipated preaching the gospel in Africa. But there are things that we can each do every moment, no matter where we are. And we can uphold each other's hands as somebody else does something that I can't do. There are women that I cannot talk to. Sarah and I were in Connecticut early on. We were having Bible studies with 4 different women. All 4 of those women had mentioned that they'd been sexually abused. I couldn't study with them without my wife. We uphold each other, and we do this work. So we're going to sing a song of invitation, inviting you to consider what you can do and how you can help make your life right with my Father's friend. Let's stand and sing.